All right, well, today we're back to work on the C6 competition drift build. We're cruising right along with this thing, and we are diving into the biggest single project of the whole build by far. So many things are going to be based around how this pans out. It's kind of like a roadblock for us to move forward because we can't start placing everything else until this is done. This is priority, so I'm really excited to get this thing nailed down. So what we're working on is obviously the turbo kit. Now, if you saw the last episode, you know we've debated a lot. We've got some leftover pieces from the original turbo kit that was on this car we weren't too fond of. It was a stock manifold and had a crossover pipe that hung really low and no room to get to the dry sump lines. So we started down the rabbit hole of redoing it. We went all the way down the rabbit hole to considering twins by the firewall, which seemed like a great option, but in practice, it was just not gonna work. So we did a little bit, just a rough draft of a mock-up header here, and we just don't have any room for the downpipe with the way we wanted to do it. So we settled on big single up front. We know where we want to put it. We've got our accessory drive nailed down. We got all of that roughed out. So all that's left is to start building the actual kit. So this header should be really easy. It can kind of go anywhere we want to put it. This header is going to be a little bit more tricky. We need to duck it under the alternator, but give ourselves as much room as possible to our dry sump lines. Now we have these really low profile Earl's fittings, super trick fittings that'll help a ton on clearance, but I want to be able to service it. And that's something we're balancing this whole build all the way through is performance, serviceability. This thing, the goal is for it to be easy to work on. I will sacrifice some performance here or there for it to be much easier to work on. So that's definitely something we're prioritizing. So that being said, let's jump into this header, get this one mocked up, see what we think, and then we can start mocking up the other header, start building them. Let's start playing with Legos. So we started assembling our Lego blocks. Now with this first design, I didn't really have a concept that I was going for. I didn't have a plan. I just kind of started putting pieces together and seeing where they fell, seeing where they ended up. So we ended up running these back runners really high, and that was kind of the goal, just to keep the back runners up high since the steering shaft slants down, and we have more room to run the front runners low than the back runners. So we started tinkering with different ways to kind of meet them all up, and the hard part is, you know, you've got to get them all lined up when you get to the collector. So it kind of dictates where the collector goes, is where you can get those front runners straightened out, pointed in the same direction as the back runners, and get everything to kind of a happy medium place. So we have to take it apart a couple of times. We switch the front runner to the outside, back runner to the inside, and we end up getting it to the point where we can get a collector on it. We have a quote-unquote completed header design. Now the problem with this one is, as you can see, not a lot of room to the plug wires. And that's definitely something we were going to try to build around, is make sure we had room for the plug wires. We don't want to be cooking a plug wire every couple runs or even every event. So this design wasn't great. It was the first one and I kind of wanted to leave it, but as much as it looked cool, that's pretty cool. That was going to be the easy side to build around. The side we really needed to focus on was the passenger side. This one's got a lot more challenges than the other side. This is really the one we need to nail down and get done first. So we switch over the flange to this side with our little starter tubes, our starter pieces, and just start playing with the Lego blocks again. So this time I had a concept in mind. I wanted to keep the front runners as the low runners and the back runners as the high runners. That way we'd have less distance where an exhaust runner was close to the dry sump lines. You know, basically if the back runners are low, they're gonna be low the entire way, whereas if only the front runners are low, they're only gonna be low for a short bit, pretty much the dry sump pumping forward. Now, as you can see, it got a little wild to accomplish that goal. All right, well, this side looks absolutely sick. However, I don't think it's gonna work like that. One, we wouldn't be able to take it off without taking the alternator bracket off, which, not the end of the world. This would come off in 3 bolts, but yeah, it's this one. This side is definitely more difficult, which is why I opted to take that side apart and do this side. So I'm glad I got these blocks. I debated on it for a while. They're really expensive, and it's a hard pill to swallow for something that's not a part for the car, but could make a drastic difference in the outcome of the part for the car. So I sucked it up and I bought the whole kit, which in hindsight, the kit comes with a bunch of different packs of pieces that mimic different bend radius. But all we have is 3-inch bend radius. That's pretty standard, and that's what we're using. So really, I should have bought 2 bags of the 3-inch bend radius, which I have there, and 2 of the straights, and then the other little pieces individually, and I probably would have spent the same money that I spent on the whole kit and been able to do both headers, like mock up both headers before I built either one. But because I didn't do that, we're gonna build this header first completely, and then we'll do the other side. Because again, we have a lot more design freedom on this side. So not only am I confident we'll be able to make something work and get it from A to B, but secondly, ideally, we'll try to make them look somewhat similar. I'm hoping I can make them look not too drastically different. This side is gonna have to be higher at the collector because the turbos, it's such a close run to the turbo, whereas this side we have room to bring the pipe up and then into the turbo. So that's why a lot of people will mock the turbo first. They'll, let's say, mount the turbo where they want it, but we've got some freedom there with where we want to put it, within a range. So I want to get the pipe, the headers built roughly, and then that way we can kind of massage the turbo around if we need to get it to where it works for both sides. That's my idea, at least. Let's just take this apart and start over. It sucks when you do it and you're like, I want to leave it because it's pretty cool, but then you're like, I know if I do it again, I could probably do it better. So what's the point of having the expensive Lego box if we don't just try a bunch of different ways and see which way seems like it'll work best? So that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna shut up and we're gonna get back to it. So we took it all back apart. I was kind of bummed to take this one apart just because I thought it looked really cool. It was definitely a super cool, aggressive looking header, but this isn't a SEMA build. We're going for function. We're going for serviceability. There's a lot of things that we need to take into account here. So I tried again to move forward with the concept of running the front runners low and the back runners high. And that was a tricky one to get done. As much as I wanted to make it work, it wasn't. Every time I tried it, it got a little better, but it wasn't quite working out like I had hoped. What would happen is it would end up putting the collector itself really low and kind of angled down, not really angled where we wanted it. So we tried it numerous different ways, kind of rearranging the front runners, the back runners, having the front runners going to one side and the back runners going to the other side and vice versa. And as you can see, the header designs start to get pretty wild, but that's the fun of having these modeling boxes. We're able to just try a bunch of different ways of doing it. So then I finally caved and I was like, all right, let's do front runners high, back runners low. No matter how I did it the other way, it didn't seem like it was going to pan out, and this seemed like it might be a better option. We had to at least give it a shot. So as we get into the third and fourth runner, it's definitely looking way more logical of a design than trying to do it the other way. It keeps everything a little more uniform, more compact, more centered. It puts the collector in a better spot. So once we come up with the design, we decided to take it out and see how we could get the header in and out, because the other ones, there was no chance. We even flipped it and put it on the driver's side just to see, and aside from a few changes, it kind of fit. All right, so another cool thing, we were about to start working on this header. Sway remembered, we had talked about putting the dry sump tank here. A few people have them here. And when we first eyeballed it, didn't seem like it was gonna work because this bracket was in the way. But not to mention, we were planning on running the downpipe through here originally. Now we've changed the turbo setup and we're running the downpipe through there. This is wide open. And if we can put it here, which we know we can, we even tested the wheel going up through the motion, it won't and can't hit it unless it breaks off, which obviously that's worst case scenario. But putting it here saves us making a whole enclosure in here, which is going to be under the dash. So trying to fill it, trying to check it, trying to drain it, all difficult. Here we got the drain right there, got the fill right here, and we don't have to run any bulkheads. We just have lines from there to there. And another big thing is our feed would be above the pump, whereas if we put it in there, the only way to run it through the firewall would be to run it up through the firewall and back down, which makes it really hard to prime the system. So I'm really, really happy about this, that we can fit this tank here. It'll save 4 lines, instead of having the 2 returns in to the firewall and then to the tank, and then the vent to the firewall to the vent tank, and then the feed to the firewall and to the feed. It'll just be the 4 lines instead of 8. So we got the fittings to do it either way. We got the pass-throughs, but this will definitely save us a lot of headache and allow us more room over here to run our coolant lines. If we're running 4 16AN lines over here, gets kind of hard to run the coolant lines on this side. There's not great room on that side. So, and with the header, building it down low like that, we'll have more room to run the coolant lines. I don't know. Anyway, that's exciting. And that's one of those things that's, as I talked about, the planning part of a build is so much of it. We've just been tinkering around for 30 minutes with this idea alone, but save us a lot of time and more shiny aluminum things in the engine bay, so Sway mentioned. It matches. So anyway, back to it. Let's try to make this header. So before we committed to making a header design for the passenger side, we wanted to play around with a few more ideas on the driver's side just to try out a bunch of different things and get a good idea of what we're going to do for both. But with that done, it was time to get serious on the passenger side and come up with a design that we could actually build. All right, well, I finally got a header design I'm happy with. This last runner, man, I tried it like 4 or 5 different ways before I came up with one that was aesthetically pleasing and gave us all the room. You can see how much more room we have in this area now. I'm happy with this. This is solid. We checked everything. We've got good clearance to our plug wires. Like if I snap that on, it's not going to come close to touching. We can get a socket on all of the plugs very easily. No weird extension combinations. That's all good. Collector's in a great spot. It's right where it needs to be. So now we need to start transferring this to steel. I gotta decide which runner. I might just start front to back. But basically what I'm gonna do is just build one runner out of steel, test fit it all back together, the next one, the next one, the next one. That way if we need to make any revisions, we can figure it out with the plastic pieces and then try to transfer that to steel. I think that's the best way to go about it. Just go one runner at a time. So let's pull it off, make sure we can get it on and off, and then go ahead and pull this front runner out and try to make it. This is the moment where it gets real. We gotta actually start cutting stuff, not just clipping plastic pieces together. So we went ahead and pulled this whole combination out as one piece. It was a little tight, but we got it out in one piece, put it on the bench, took a look at it as a completed unit. There were some things I wasn't happy with, but I knew we could probably change those when we transferred it to steel. I tried to use their little worksheet, but it didn't end up working out quite like I hoped. This wasn't really a direct one-to-one transfer. It was more so gave me a general idea of the concept I was going for, and then I had to start doing some things a little bit different when it came to the steel. So we started cutting out our pieces. Our first piece, this is again where it gets real. So we cut the leg off, go ahead and cut through the U-bend, clean it up on the belt grinder as per usual, and then start working on getting it in the flange. Now this is where things got a little tricky. It just did not want to go in the flange. Granted, we had to cut a little bit into the bend, but we were pretty close to the straight section. It was just a little bit ovaled and the flange was just a little too tight. So I spent a lot of time hammering and rounding it out. I finally got it to go in and then started working on cutting the rest of the pieces. So I cut another bend to get that main 90 for the first runner, and then I went ahead and cut some quote-unquote pie cuts. Now these are just for me to have some little pieces to try to fudge it and do what I need to do to get it exactly where I want it if we have a tight spot that we can't quite get to. So we got the front runner mostly mocked up in there. It's pretty straightforward, it's pretty simple. The second runner is where things are gonna get really tricky because we have to cut and go up over the front runner, under the alternator, and then try to match the front runner's angle as early as possible to keep the collector as far back as possible. And this is where those little pie cut pieces really came into play. So we used the PET tape. This stuff works really well for this kind of thing, but it started to become a struggle here because it was a very tight spot to get into to begin with, and trying to get the piece of tape on there and hold all these pieces, but it gave us the general idea. We've got the second runner roughly where it needs to go. We've got the first runner pointing in the right direction. It just needs to be a little longer to match the second runner, and you kind of see what I'm getting at. We've got the gist here of the first and second ones. Now, normally, I don't like to start tacking things until I've got the whole thing modeled out, or anything that's going to be affected by something else. Just because, things change, I don't want to have to cut tacks, but this stuff was just too hard to hold together with tape, and it was getting kind of risky that it would just all fall apart, so I decided to go ahead and tack what we had and work from there. We knew that these two would line up roughly where they needed to, and that we could most likely get them where they needed to go, get them into the collector, and then the last two runners, we've got a lot of leeway in design freedom with those. These front two are the most space constrained and have the shortest amount of time to get where they need to go, so they're the most important. All right, here's my revised plan for this header. I kind of really like this. I had this one going to the left side, this one going to the right side. Whereas this one's kind of cool because it mimics this. So number 3, low to the outside. Number 4, up, over, down, in. Now the cool part too is these are pretty much mirror image. So there's a little bend at the end, straight tiny bend straight for a while, and we'll curve up, curve this way, curve this way. So I did check, and you can definitely get a spark plug socket on there with the ratchet. You can do it from the top or the bottom. We should have plenty of room under here. This gives us room to go over this ledge here to our dry sump tank. Still tons of room to the collector. I like that. Definitely aesthetically pleasing. On one hand, I know I shouldn't be focusing on aesthetics, but it is my first header build, and it's kind of fun. I want them to look cool. So really happy with how it's turning out. I really like this collector location. So let's try to make runner number 3. See how that goes. Then we can do number 4. So by this point, we had a good plan and a good understanding of how to transfer from the box. Like I said, it wasn't so much of a one-to-one translation, more so getting the idea of the overall length and the angle of the different pieces, and then kind of filling in the gaps with steel once you got the first couple pieces laid down. So we would cut in the bend on the bandsaw and then cut any straight section on the cold cut saw. The cold cut saw makes a much nicer, cleaner cut, but you can't cut in the middle of the bend like we needed to quite often. So I went ahead and pulled the flange off and wanted to make sure I could get this piece to go in since I had so much trouble with the first two. Once we got the first start going with the idea, went ahead and started attacking it. Now, like I said, I normally don't do this, but it seemed to work out well with the first ones, and it just makes it easier to build from there if you're not relying on tape to hold your whole concept and design together. So we've got the start of our third runner done. Now we've got to fill in the gap from A to B down into the collector. Now this part, it gets trickier the further we go down because it's kind of harder to spot and see what you're looking at because now it's under 2 runners since we're running these back ones low. But we've got the gist and we're just taking it piece by piece. So get an idea with the blocks, cut a piece, tack it on, put it in, get an idea, and we're pretty close to getting the third runner into the collector. Now, obviously the fourth one, the last one's gonna be the hardest one because it's easy to kind of jiggle things around and get 3 to line up, but to get 4, I knew it was going to be tricky. So once we had the third one done, the third one in place, we went ahead and started working on the fourth one. Now we knew the start needed to wrap around and go over, but from there it was a little bit of an unknown. And one of the big things I wanted to ensure was that we could get to the spark plug. Now when we actually put the metal in there, it was a little tighter than we thought. So we extended it a little bit, got it to where we were happy with it, and decided to pull the header off the car. That way we could finish out this last runner on the bench because there was just no good way to access it to mock things up and figure out what we needed to do. You're kind of crawling under the car and reaching around the frame rail and between there and the subframe. We knew where our clearances were. There shouldn't be any clearance issues. We knew the gist of what it needed to look like. We just needed to get that last bit finalized, and this part had to be pretty dang precise. So with the last runner done, we put the header back in place to make sure it still fit, which it did, and it went in without taking anything apart. All right, we got the header back in. Really happy with that. Obviously, this is only like half the battle, but the fact that we got the shape done, super stoked. Really happy with the collector location. I'm really glad that we were able to pitch it that way some because that's just going to help a lot getting over there because we'll have the intercooler piping here, and that was one thing I was worried about was getting a bend in time to not start encroaching on all this. So that panned out really well. Really happy with it aesthetically, having the double up and over. Runner 1 and 3 going down and going to the right side, 2 and 4 going up over into the left side, and we're able to get it in and out. So that was huge. Didn't seem like we were gonna be able to when we first took it out to finish that last runner, but everything seems good. So now, like I said, this is half the battle. What we gotta do, we're gonna pull it back out, and then we're gonna take each runner off, clean them up, weld out each individual runner, because you can't really weld them with them attached. Put it all back together, weld the flange, then we're gonna slip the collector off, weld in these stars. These are gonna seal the center of the tubes. Then we'll put the collector back on and weld out the collector, and then it'll be actually done. So we got a good bit of welding and taking apart and reinstalling out of us, but getting the main shape done was definitely a big deal, and this was definitely the harder side. So I'm real curious to see what we can do on this side. It is gonna have to be asymmetrical, unfortunately, because where the turbo is so much closer to this side that it needs room to make the turn into the turbo. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. We still got one whole header to finish building, so I guess let's take this thing back off, start welding out runners. Hopefully it all goes smoothly. There's tight on there, boy. Oh, I was gonna tack them more. Well, too late.
You know what I'm saying?
But I was gonna tack them more while they were in the flange still. But it's fine. So I was anxious and eager to get this done, so I just started welding, but then it dawned on me. Oh, I forgot I was gonna back purge. So I hooked up my back purge setup so that way we can flow argon to the inside of the weld because it gets really hot just like the outside of the weld, and without any gas coverage it'll oxidize and build stalagmites. It's not good. Alright, well you can see the difference. So up there is where I didn't back purge and the rest is where I did. So where I did back purge, you see nothing on the inside. None of that stalagmites. So I'm glad I remembered. I mean, it's kind of cool that I did part of it without it because you can really tell the difference, but I just totally forgot that I was going to back purge this. I don't often back purge. I probably should more, but I never care enough to, especially for whatever I'm building. It's not that important. It's not really going to make a difference. But for a turbo header and for this car in general, we're taking the extra step. We're back purging. So it worked out well. Definitely made a huge difference. So let's get back to it. So we got straight back into welding these runners out, getting us one step closer to having a finished header. Now, it's funny because I was thinking that this was going to take a long time. If you've watched a lot of my fab projects, you know I like to do pie cuts. I'll be honest, I have to admit it. I like to do pie cuts. And, you know, building the thing with the pie cuts is the smallest part of the work. It's when you take it off and you've got to weld around a 3-inch pipe, which is 12 inches of weld over a dozen times, 20 times, 30 times. It takes a long time. However, with these runners, we've only got 2 to 3 to 4 welds at the most per runner, and they're around a 1.75 inch pipe, so way less overall distance. Needless to say, these welded out much quicker than I was expecting. I thought this was going to take us a while, and next thing you know, we're on the last runner, the longest runner, and luckily we were able to make these all in pretty few pieces. There's a couple of excessive pieces in some of them, but for the most part, you know, we don't have 10 welds per runner. We've only got 3, 4, or 5 welds per runner. So this was honestly a really nice project to do. It welded out a lot quicker than I hoped it would. Really, the biggest struggle with welding something like this is when it's awkwardly shaped. It's kind of hard to hold it exactly where you need it, and it starts moving around, and you can't really get the right angle, but we got it done. All 4 runners are welded up. So now it's time to put them all back together, reassemble the header in the car, get all the runners in the flange, get the collector on. Now, this is something I was a little worried about. The collector was really tight to get on and off, just all of these pipes coming in and at slightly different angles, but we managed to get it done. All right, well, header went back together. Everything still fits good. Super, super happy with that, man. I am really pleased with how this turned out. Minimal welds, super happy it all fit back together nice. Now we could have done without these welds, but I had to elongate these after the fact from what I had originally mocked up. So one of those things, but all in all, pretty minimal welds, which is ideal on a turbo header because it's gonna get real hot. But yeah, so super stoked. However, we are not at the finish line yet. We've got the Fronius weld over here. Probably need to turn this amperage up a touch so that we can tack as much as we can in the car before we pull it off. We're close. She's coming together nice, but we got to carry her across the finish line. So enough jibber jabber. Let's get to it. See if we can't finish this header out and start on the other side. So we needed to at least get the runners tacked to the flange in the car before we pulled it out, because any bit of movement when we take it out, none of this is going to fit right. We've got really tight fit up around the frame rail and everything. We couldn't afford to let it move. So we tacked it in the car, pulled it out, threw a few more tacks on the flange itself, and then I went ahead and tacked the collector to the runners because it is so tight that if any one of them moves at all, it's game over. It's not going to fit back together. So I wanted to tack the collector in so that way everything could heat up and cool down and make all its movements it needs to make, all while being tacked into the collector, so hopefully we can cut the tacks off, pull the collector back off, and nothing has moved from where we started with it. Now, obviously, welding to the flange is probably the trickiest part of all of this. There's a lot to get around, especially at the front of the header where all the pipes angle down. There's not a lot of room, playing with different stick outs, different end caps on the TIG torch. Some of it was really easy and really nice to weld. When you're welding into a corner like this against something thick, you can make some really nice consistent welds without really that much effort or without that steady of a hand, but it's tricky to get around some of it. So we go ahead and cut the tacks. I hate cutting tacks. I try with everything in me to avoid having to cut tacks. I just don't like doing it. But this was one of those things that was better safe than sorry. So we got the tacks off. We got the collector off. We went ahead and tacked our star in the center. Now these aren't lined up perfectly because we wanted to keep that collector as far back as possible. So we couldn't afford to let everything fully straighten out and lose another 2 or 3 inches forward. So welding this star in was a little tricky. You know, some places we'd have a gap, some places we'd have an overhang, but what this is going to do is seal the inside of the headers. And then we weld to the runners all the way out, so that way when we weld the collector in, we can weld to that outside weld, and then basically it's entirely sealed off. So welding the collector was pretty fun. It's another one of those welds where you're welding down into a corner, but it's relatively thin, so it was nice to weld, nice to make look good. The only trouble was getting down into the corners. I had to extend the stick out on the TIG torch to get down in there and then bring it back out, and that was a little bit tricky, but we got it done. Header is fully welded up. All right, it's done. I can officially put the stamp on it. It's done. Collector went back on. We welded it all up. It all welded pretty good, welding around the collector. But all in all, man, I am very pleased. We kept the collector from warping too much. It's got a tiny, tiny bit, but I mean, well within the tolerance of the gasket. It's a header. It's official. We made it through the finish line. I was worried we'd get tripped up somewhere and this not fit or whatever, but we made it. Well, we still have one more thing to do, and that's put it back on the car and make sure it still fits. But if it still fits, we're good. And we can move on to the other side. So let's throw this thing back on, see how it looks, and start mocking up the other side. See if we can make something look relatively similar. Ideally the double over. It's just hard. Oh, I want to see actually. This one runner's too low. Yeah. So that's not gonna work. But I want to do something similar. It's not too bad to install. You gotta know the trick. I don't know that we can get it. Yeah, it might be tricky to get out with the drum sometimes. But I mean, if we ever absolutely had to get it out and we couldn't get it out, we could pull the alternator off and just bring it straight out the top. So I'm not too concerned about that.
Might get weird with the flange too, or whatever.
Oh, the V-band, yeah, true.
It's okay.
Either way, I mean, if we have to pop the alternator bracket off, it's 3 Allen bolts. This thing should come out no problem. I was more concerned with spark plug clearance and all of that stuff, and being able to get spark plugs in and out, than being able to easily remove the header. Obviously, you want to do all of those things, but sometimes you gotta kind of pick your poison, pick what you're willing to live with and what you're not. And I'll be honest, went for aesthetics. Wanted it to look nice too. Wow, dude. Damn. That's it. That is a custom built turbo header. Fits like a glove. Feels good, man. Always wanted to build a header. Well, I always thought it would be really hard. It really wasn't. It definitely wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. Definitely wasn't that bad. I wish I hadn't pulled the torch away too early over here, because you can see I got good gas coverage on all these. That's why they're the same color. But then this one, I stopped and pulled the torch away. And, I mean, those colors are cool, but it would have been better if it was uniform. Gonna get ceramic coated anyway. I'm nitpicking. It fits, it works. It's all together. Let's start on this side. So by this point, we've designed probably a dozen different header options on both sides. We really know kind of what we're shooting for, what we're going for, what works, what doesn't, and how it transfers to steel as well after building the other headers. So we know what we need to do with the plastic to make it easier to transfer that to metal. So we start building out this header, and the idea is, again, kind of high up and angled in and down just a little bit to point towards the turbo. So we try a few renditions. You never know exactly what you're gonna like till you see it. And after a little tinkering and a little odds and ends, we kind of come up with a rough game plan of what we're going for. All right, I think we settled on a design. Works really well. We've got plug wire room. We've got room to get the plugs in and out. We've got good room to our coil pack. Still got a great angle of attack to go down into the turbo. And while it's not asymmetrical, it's similar. Wish I could do it low, but it can't. Plus, we got to run the exhaust through here, and we need to be able to get to that too. That's another thing. So I think that's it. So now we just got to start making it. Now it might change a little bit once we go to steel, but we're just going to take it one runner at a time. We'll start with the first runner, then the second runner, and then these back two have a lot of leeway to go where they need to go. It's more of an aesthetic thing than anything else on how we build these out. So I guess let's give it a shot. I always hate taking it apart, but pull the front runner off and start making actual pieces. So this header went a lot quicker than the first one. One, the overall design was a bit easier to execute. Two, we had a really good idea of what we were doing and how we needed to do it, where we needed to add a little length, what we needed to do there, all of that stuff we had figured out on the first header. So I was really excited to build this one because this was really more of a challenge to make it aesthetically pleasing than make it fit. The other side, we really had to juggle both. This side, we've got plenty of room to bring it up and over. We can just kind of worry about what looks the best. Yeah, as silly as that is, but with all the other, I's dotted and T's crossed, that's really all we need to do is just make it look cool. So we just started hammering it out runner by runner. Quickly, we got the first two runners done. We got them into the collector. The collector wasn't as tight as the first time. We had a little more room to get everything uniformly straight as it went into the collector. Started working on the third one. I finally broke out these tack clamps that I bought with the modeling blocks. So these hold the two pieces together so you can mock it up and then tack it. Definitely a lot stronger than tape, but takes a little more setup time. Really depends on how you're feeling. But with this one being so long, if these were off any little bit at all, it was going to make a drastic difference on the other end. And with them being so long and heavy, tape was not going to cut it on holding them together and letting us tack them. So worked out really well for this one. All right, got the final design here. We tried a couple. We have this one. I guess I could show it to you. But basically, it goes over this runner and tucks back down and then rides up with this pipe. But I think this looks more uniform and nicer to just run it straight. I'll show you real quick. It's kind of like that, basically. Like, it's all right, but it's more bends, more welds. Really doesn't solve us any problems. So we're gonna go with this guy. All right, well, this is it. The home stretch, the last runner. And this one's pretty straightforward as well. I knew the last two would be. They're mostly straight shots, so just repeat process as before. Like I said, we've got this pretty licked at this point, how to cut it, where to cut it, how that translates to the modeling blocks. There was a bit of a learning curve there, but now we know exactly how to mark them to get the angle that we're looking for, and man, this thing went together quick. Now, most of it went together quick. This last little bit, this last dip into the collector was really tricky, purely from an aesthetic standpoint. I wanted it to match the bend and bend at the same time as the other one, but with the different angle of the pipe and the different height, I tried my best, but it was really tricky to get this right and aesthetically pleasing. All right, well, this header is officially done as far as the build out, mocking, tacking, all of that's concerned. I'm not super stoked on this last runner. I was really trying to get it to perfectly match that one, but it's not possible to go over it and perfectly match the angle because now it's at a different angle. I tried. So that's one thing I'm unhappy with. I'll be honest, it bugs me a little bit, but overall it's solid. It's what I was going for. It all fits good. The collector goes on and off nice and easy, a lot easier than that side did, and minimal welds on most of them. It really came together nice. So gotta take it apart, weld the runners, put it back together. You know the drill. Same old process as last time. So we're just gonna snap our way through it since you guys already seen this. All right, check it out. Header is fully finished up. Really happy with how the flange welds came out. I did get a little rush when I did the collector, so I didn't do that great of a job, but I mean, it's totally fine. It's just, yeah, anyway, jibber jabber. I cannot tell you guys how stoked I am to have this project done. One, because this is the biggest single project left on this build as a whole. This is something I've never done before. It was kind of an unknown. It's a big project to build a custom set of headers. So to have that done, I mean, there's still a good bit to go to finish the turbo kit out. We've got to do the hot side to the turbo, downpipe / exhaust all the way out, and the cold side. So, I mean, we're not at the finish line yet in that sense, but to have the header aspect of it done is huge. That's, again, a huge step forward in the build process. And how they came out, man, they came out better than I could have hoped. Better than I could have hoped. You know, I was just focused on getting them in the right place, getting them to clear everything and pointed roughly the right direction to make the rest of the hot side easy. But I really wanted to make sure that we could easily get the plugs out and not have any plug wires that have to rest on the header. But I thought, you know, that's kind of a long shot. You know, it's going to be a big enough struggle just to get them to fit and go where they need to go. But the fact that we were able to accomplish that as well is amazing. Like, no problem at all to take these plugs out. None of the plug wires are going to touch on the header. On this side, there's this one that's tricky, but I mean, I can get the socket and ratchet on there, no problem. So, yeah, okay. I could jibber jabber on and on, but yeah, I mean, it would have been cool if we could have made them symmetrical, but I also kind of liked that we weren't able to and we had to work around stuff because I got to do two very different header designs. You know, the double hump on this side, down and low, and then this side, the long, tall, up, kind of praying mantis style. Man, what a most rewarding fab project I've ever done, by far. So we still got to weld V-bands on. We still got to build the rest of the turbo kit, but that is a big thing off the checklist. Do I have it on the checklist? I don't even think I have it on the checklist. See, I can't cross it off yet. I got to wait. It's build turbo kit hot side. I should have done build headers, then build turbo kit hot side. So can't cross that off yet. But anyway, I'm sure this has been a long episode, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Let me know what you guys think of the headers. Really stoked on this. Really happy that we figured out we can put the dry sump tank there. That is another huge plus in the side of doing the single turbo. Yeah, so I'm going to let you guys go before I just rant on and on about how excited I am. I've been really excited for this project, but a little nervous because, you know, never done it. So to be done with it, and for the fact that it came out good to me, couldn't be happier. So I'm gonna quit. I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye.